B. Gordon, and you're listening to The Sassholes.
Welcome to Sassholes. With a combined 100 years of making interesting decisions, Jamie, Justin, KG, and myself, Pete, are dedicated to helping sales leaders or aspiring sales leaders accelerate revenues with our no BS approach to sales leadership strategies and tactics. Please subscribe to our YouTube and Apple podcasts. Today our guest is Janice B. Gordon. Janice is the founder of Scale Your Sales, author of Business Evolution, Creating Growth in a Rapidly Changing World, co-author of Heels to Deals, How Women Are Dominating Business-to-Business Sales, and founder of the Scale Your Sales podcast. Known as the customer growth expert in LinkedIn sales, 15 innovating sales influencers to follow 2021. She's a multi-award winning entrepreneur and consultant, as well as an international keynote speaker with features in the Sunday Times and Forbes. But before we get to Janice B. Gordon, we got some Patreon love to give out to our business supporters. Unlock key account growth with Demand Farm Smart Software to bring account planning and relationship intelligence into your CRM, making key account management practice data-driven, predictable, and scalable. Request a demo now at demandfarm.com. Ask for Iron Man. Hey, KG.
What?
Do you know Brent Keltner?
I've heard of that guy. He's written some books. Maybe he's been on our show. I don't know.
He's got this master class, Grow Revenue Faster by Making the Shift from Product-Driven Selling to Authentic Conversations. Hey, Winalytics, build the revenue organization you want. Request a free 60-minute growth consultation at winalytics.com. Ask for Brent and say KG sent you. Ask about the master class. Hey, we'd also like to say, hey, Aaron J. and Trent S., thank you for your support. It's a real ego boost. Hey, looking... Software developer manager, 10 years experience, C, Pound, MS, SQL, Angular, React, Azure, Cloud, ASP.NET, Core, also Node, JZ, Angular web development. Email Pete at sassholes.net. Recruiters, I got a hot one for you. Hey, KG.
Yes, Pete.
KG.
Yes, Pete.
The sheep walks into a bar. Leave us some comments on our blog at sassholes.net. KG, you got any shout outs?
Yeah, I just have one. My good friend Corey Van Ort. She was like the fourth salesperson we hired at ZipRecruiter in the second hiring class back in 2013. A happy birthday to Corey. Hope you're doing well. That's it, Pete. Just a nice guy.
Oh, she's got a great initials there, a CVO. I'm sure that'll be some type of acronym for a promotion to somebody in the corporate world in the next few years.
Probably.
Hey, Doug Salazar, 15 years at Career Builder. Continue the fight, my friend. One of the greatest techs I've ever known. Amy Anderson, 3 years at KXAN TV in Austin, Texas. Okay, KG, how do we find Janice from across the pond?
Well, I found her sort of like two different ways. One, I found her through Lori Richardson's, Women in Sales group. Women Sales Pros, Sales Experts page. I mean, she's just literally listed as a women sales expert. But then I also did some additional research, and I was looking for sales influencers on LinkedIn, and Janice came up as well. And so, hoped, just like when I proposed to my wife, Pete, I closed my eyes, hoped and prayed, and sent a message to Janice B. Gordon, and hopefully she would come on the show. And here she is today. Janice, thanks for coming on the show and gracing us.
It's a pleasure. I'm looking forward to this, boys.
She's got her own podcast, Pete. So it's sort of like she's like we're comparing what she's doing, but
yeah, we're just trying to expand the pie. That's all we're trying to do. Expand the pie. Plenty to go around.
Yeah.
So Janice, when did you become an expert in sales? Did you ever have to actually sell something?
Brutal.
This is like when I grow up. Well, I haven't yet grown up. So do you know, way back in the 1990s, we used to do stand-up cold calling until they banned it here in Europe. I learned all of my sales skills and the sales process back then. So yes, I'm of the age when I remember all of that, 8 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday, stand up cold calling. And on a Tuesday at 7 o'clock in the evening, stand up cold calling, like going through the telephone book. It's brutal, but that's where you learn a lot of your sales skills.
Now, hold on, stand up. Help me out, because my version back in the day was we took everybody's chairs away and they couldn't get them back unless they set an appointment first thing in the morning. What does that mean to you? I'm sure you don't do that across the pond.
No, we're a bit nicer. We don't take the chairs away, but you would forfeit that you'd have to buy all the drinks in the pub, the first person to sit down.
That's awesome. How did you get from that to where you are today?
It's an interesting journey. So, like the traditional sales, working in financial services, I did an MBA because I wanted to expand my business knowledge. I've always been in business, and even that was self-employed. And I moved on to work after my MBA for a customer experience consultancy. And it was a real revelation. And that completely changed the way I think about sales today. And that I thought that we were so introverted. It was all about features and benefits and not about the customer. And so customer experience is all about the customer. And so that's really been my mantra ever since. So I went on and I set up a restaurant and bar and grew that in employing people, but used a lot of the sales skills and the customer experience skills. It was also at the time when Facebook first started. So we know what happened in 2008 with the recession. We were still growing, whereas other businesses were going out of business because we were using Facebook, and we were using email marketing. We were using a lot of the new marketing methodologies to keep our customers informed and to stay close to our customers. So all of the customer experience allowed me to sell more and allowed me to guarantee my sales. So I thought there's something in here that we're not picking up in the B2B world. So when I came out of working in that environment and started consultancy, I maintained the real customer focus, which is why now I'm called the customer growth expert, really looking at sales from the customer point of view. And that's all of what I do for companies.
That's so MBA, restaurant, bar, consultancy, MBA, restaurant, bar, B2B work. Am I hearing you right?
Yeah, you are.
Do you, I always thought about going and getting an MBA, and I never did it because I was making too much money in sales and I couldn't justify taking the time off. Do you not regret, that's not the right word, but do you think getting the MBA was worth it?
Yes, because I think it changes your mindset. You're not expected to know everything, but you actually know everything's out there, so you can actually gain the experience. I've never been the kind of consultant that's worked for the big six and I create a program and walk away, and then the customer puts it in their bottom drawer having spent thousands of pounds. I've always been, I really want to make sure that I'm helping people to make not only the mindset shifts, but the behavioral shifts as well. So it's all very well strategizing, but you've got to implement it. I want to be around to share in the success and the results. So I've always been that type of implementer.
Got it. Interesting. We had somebody on the show recently. It was John Barrows, and he talked about 10, 60, 30. 10% of the people that you train are just going to be like, whatever, this doesn't make any sense. 30%, 60% of the people are going to be like, I'll take one thing and maybe that's okay. And like 30% are just going to be like, whatever, You're sticking around to create that behavior change. Can you really do it in mass? Like, do you believe in the 10, 30, 60 that John Barrow was talking about and making those changes? I mean, because there's obviously people that are just like, whatever, Janice, be Gordon, like 10%. Like, do you stick around for that change? Is that worth it?
Well, I think what I do is I assess organizations to see where the gaps are. We often can't see what's in front of our own nose. And so if you're able to do a diagnostic, a sales specific diagnostic based upon that company, that sales team, that vertical that they're working in, based on their own unique situation, and then you can see where the gaps are. What I'm about is filling those gaps. And often I meet lots of salespeople who have been selling for years and they may not be hitting targets. I mean, after all, the stats hasn't changed. 50% of salespeople do not hit targets for the last 30 years. Now, what's that telling us? It's telling us what we're doing isn't working. So whether it's John Barrows or anybody, what we're doing in terms of training sales is not working, but we seem to keep doing it. It's ridiculous. So, I think we've got to look at the systems and processes, all of the support systems that are actually there. We have managers that don't know how to coach. We have leaders that don't know how to coach. We know with training, within a month, the majority of that training has been forgotten. So it's the coaching that changes the behavior, not the training, not the hit and run training. You've got to keep going in and keep embedding that learning and changing the behavior. So that's what I'd say on one thing. So maybe the 30% of the people that you might write off, well, actually, it could be the way that you're training. And then the other thing is, when you're doing the assessment, there may be some people that are in the wrong role. So if you assess it doesn't matter how much training you give them. If they're in the wrong role for their unique skills and strengths, we're not focusing on training for their weaknesses, but looking at their unique skills and strengths, you put them in the right role. Guess what? They're going to excel easily. So this is why you need the right type of assessment to actually look at your organization, your people, your processes. And if you align all of those and get those right, you're going to sell. You're going to sell. You can't help but sell because you're well aligned.
Janice, you said 50% are not hitting quota. Is that a problem?
It's a problem in that it's a cost to the sales organization. It's a huge waste to the sales organization. It costs a lot to recruit, to retrain, to onboard these people. And then if they're not hitting targets, then it's a loss to the company.
What percentage should hit the target then?
It's going to change from year to year, but I would aim for an 80% of people hitting targets. That's what would be my aim, and that's what I get my organizations to look at. But you can't do that if you simply go in and train. You have to assess where you are, where the gaps are, move people around, and then you're going to be hitting 80% of targets. There's a guarantee if you recruit the right people for the right role and you enable them by onboarding them correctly, they are going to be within the top quartile within a year. So it's all of the systems and processes and onboarding around enabling that person that is actually putting the barriers up for that person to perform.
You said the key word recruitment, and is that synonymous with assessment? Like, there's different strategies to build a team. You can spend zero money in recruitment and just hire everybody and then have processes in place to weed people out. What percentage of your budget and time should you be spending on the assessment piece of things or recruitment?
Yeah, that's what they used to do. The ones that survive are the winners, really. And we're recruiting a huge number of people, and we actually expect a huge number to fail. Well, really, this is some backward way of running a professional organization. And this is why sales really does have a problem, because a lot of organizations are still doing that. Often we do not count the cost of waste, the time that poor sales manager has to work with poorly trained people that they kind of spend time with, but they expect to leave. What a waste. Why are we working in this kind of negative environment? Instead, of recruiting 100 or 10 people, why don't you recruit one? But you recruit the one right person. You invest a lot less time in the one right person. You have really good onboarding processes. Within a short space of time, they are performing. And not only are they performing, they're accelerating. Then you recruit the other one. There's a lot less of management time in recruitment. And then we're talking about the way that we recruit. I like this guy, but they went to the same university as me. They look like me. I understand them. They're going to succeed. This is nonsense, absolute nonsense. We really need to look at the, rather than personality testing. I mean, how can you say if I'm a dominant person that I'm going to be a good salesperson? Tell me where the link is. There is no link. We shouldn't be using personality testing to define what is good in sales. What we should be using in sales to define what's good is sales-specific data that has a history.
How do you do that in recruiting, though?
You would give them a questionnaire. So the questionnaire has particular questions that will eke out whether they have the willingness, the behaviors, whether they have competencies, even if they haven't worked in sales. We're selling all the time. So it's about really measuring what their competence is, what their behaviors, what their mindset is, what their willingness is. So you give them the questionnaire before you interview them. The questionnaire will actually be able to tell you whether this is a good candidate or not. Then when you interview, I don't want a manager interviewing them without any training. I want the manager to ask the same question in the same way to the different groups of people. You have to set up processes that are measurable in order to then put everyone through that process to see which are the ones that are going to come out on top of the process. Not throwing them to the wall and see who's going to survive.
You think role play is a positive thing to do in an interview process to give them a scenario and see if they can sell their way out of it or into it?
Yeah, a lot of sales schools are doing this now, aren't they? Yes, I think it works really well. But when you're doing it in a controlled environment, so you have sales schools that will have these competitions and role play, it's a controlled environment. And so every candidate goes through the same process. It becomes measurable. You can see who comes out on top. The problem is when you have role play and you're doing it in a sales organization, it isn't a controlled environment, and there's a lot of bias that's in there. So it is good, but it's the way that you apply it.
Actually haven't. I mean, I'm in Los Angeles here, and I did away with the role play process years and years ago because I found that people were far better at acting the part than actually doing the job. And I found literally no correlation between those that did well in the role play and those that did well in sales. When we were hiring for enterprise salespeople at ZipRecruiter, though, we did include a role play, but the role play had very specific goals, and that was can they use, can they create their own deck in Google, Google Slides? Can they use Zoom and Google Meets, like technologically, can they use them? Can they do a decent discovery? And we had some very, very specific, goals. Not to see, how gregarious they were. That was irrelevant to the process. But I have some strong opinions on that role play, obviously. But I think, Pete and I are like grizzled old, inside sales leaders.
Well, we gotta let's clear it up. We're talking about SDRs right now. We're not talking about account executives. They're coming out of school. People coming out of school 15, 20 years ago are different from the people coming out of school right now. Two different things. So again, I'm going to repeat myself, but you have kids coming out of a structured environment where they expect outcomes, and then they get introduced into this process where nothing is expected because you don't know the person on the other end of the telephone or the monitor. They'll give an outcome that is not expected, and they get frustrated, and then they split. So I'm just kind of curious in the recruitment process how you can weed some of that stuff out. Because if you do a better job on recruitment, on bringing the people in, there's less wasted time on training and whatnot. And I'm just trying to figure out what that right formula is, and that's why I bring it up.
Yeah, and you were talking about the role play in terms of assessing skills as opposed to assessing personality. And I would agree with that. Whether that is role play or not, I'm not so sure, but it's an assessment of skills, a test on skills. Yeah, fine. And I think even if you have somebody going into a sales role that has no experience of sales, whether they've come from a university, college, and they've done role playing there in a controlled environment, or whether they've come from a completely different environment, they're going to fail. They're going to fail on every avenue that you put them through, they're going to fail. Great. They've learned something, but they've only learned something if you have got the right mentor, or coach with them that understands what's the aim of what you're testing for, and understands that, they are going to fail, and they don't get, kind of screamed out, the old way of selling, when you fail, you get screamed at, as opposed to really nurturing them through the process, because it's going to be completely foreign, whether they've come out of school and they've had they think they've had some idea, or whether they've come from a different environment. Sales is quite a unique environment, and you have to go through the trial by fire in order to come out the other end, really.
Yeah.
Well, when you have 100% success rate coming out of college, and then you're going into 95% failure rate in sales, that is something that they can go through the interview process. They can say all that they want, and what's going to determine it is the first 2 weeks they're on the job after training that they're doing it. Are they resilient enough? Are they curious enough to continue on, the process? And
hence having the questionnaire prior to even interviewing. That's right. You're going to filter out that, are they resilient? Is there a willingness to sell? How do they cope with failure, feedback? That's what you want to know. And if they are resilient, then they're going to be able to bounce back, whatever the situation is.
Yes.
So that's what you really want to be testing for before you bring them into the interview process.
All right, you got me going on questionnaires, okay? Where does the benchmark come from? What do you where are you setting the level, and can people game the system, answering the questions, kind of perceive the way the question should be answered? Let's start with the benchmark. You have a question mark. There's so many companies out there. I've used them. I'm sure you've used them. What do you compare success? What is the database that you compare success to? Do you take your current successful reps that maybe just got successful now, or don't have the same traits as when you did the benchmark a year and a half ago? How do you set that up?
Okay, well, I'm licensed to a company, and I'm not going to be kind of selling the company.
Sell the company, because then I'm going to sell myself to them.
Right. Okay. It's an organization called OMG, Objective Management and Group. They've been going for over 25 years. It's the only verified sales specific data. So it's not a personality test. So now if you've got millions and millions of people that have answered the questionnaire over the last 25 years, and you know what good looks like for each of the key points that they're measuring, then when you put in your person into that, we're able to say, is this a fit? Is this a match? Is this, would we recommend them based upon that source of data that we've had before? So we're able to see, willingness to sell. How can we actually measure those things? What does good look like? How does this person measure up to that? competence. And there's going to be different levels of competence. If you're an SDR or a BDM, even if you're a sales leader or a manager. So the types of questionnaires are going to change based on what is the role that you're recruiting for, what is the industry you're recruiting for, what's unique about that particular company that they need to fill a gap in their sales team. So you put in those questions to refine it for that particular person, for that role, for that industry, for the culture of that organization. And we, as I say, we've got 25 years, millions of data points that we're measuring this against, and can guarantee, if you accept our recommendation, that they'll be within the top quartile within the first year.
So in a controlled study, I'm sure you take a group that didn't do the questionnaire and a group that did, and you've seen the results where the group that took it are, what's the number you're using since you want to sell?
Yeah, well, it's 95%. 95% of the people that we recommend would be in the top quartile.
Wow.
There are lots of companies that will say, oh, I really like this guy. And it's like, well, all we can do is advise you. We don't go back a year later and said, well, told you so. But the data, I'm not a data scientist, but I trust 25 years, millions of data points, really. Yeah. It's a bigger brain than I've got. And so, 95%. Why would you waste the money otherwise? It's just a lot of stress when you're trying to get rid of poorly performing salespeople. We've all been through that. It is really onerous. Why would you want to do that to yourself? I want to focus on my customers. I want to focus on growing my company. I don't want to focus on, and I don't know any sales leader that wants to go down that line. But yet we still say, oh, trust my gut. Let me recruit someone I like.
Well, yeah. I mean, look. I subscribe, even for the most junior of level salespeople, Janice, I subscribe to hire slow, fire fast, and any additional data points that I can gather during the interview process, I'll use it if I can get data from an assessment. But here's what I have seen, and this is my own mistakes that I've been slapped and corrected. I think a lot of people overvalue assessments and use it as a single data point, and make hiring decisions solely based on, hey, the assessment came back and said this one should fall into the 95th percentile, so let's just make the hire. I believe that while that's the MRI in the interview process, there's still other examination that, an X-ray and a physical that needs to occur during the interview process. Do you see some of your clients overvaluing the assessment? I mean, you can't just give them the assessment and say, just hire this person, right?
I haven't seen any other, I really looked into this. I haven't seen any other assessment that tailors the question to the culture of the organization, to the particular role, to the industry sector that they're in. And unless you actually have that, it doesn't really matter what questions you're asking from a database. You have got to tailor those questions. Yeah. And if the results are, we would advise you to recommend this, recruit this person's recommended, is based on the information you gave the questionnaire. It's based on the requirements that you said you wanted. Right. So why would you go against that? You've said you've put in the requirements. Totally. And this is said based on the data that you wanted. This is a recommend. It seems crazy that you would go against that, really.
But what I'm getting at is, this is awesome, by the way, because we can go back and forth on assessments forever, and I want to know about your book, by the way. Should they just give the assessment and then make the offer?
What do you mean, give the assessment?
So,
I see what you mean. From assessment, no, you would still have it would narrow you down to one or two people you would want to recruit, but we're still in a people business. So you would still want to, meet the person, but actually, and there may be the question also gives you, when you do interview, it gives you some interview questions for that particular person. right?
Yeah.
So there's certain things you may want to investigate further. Their willingness to sell may be 100%, but in terms of the competence, there may be one or two warning areas.
Yeah.
Not enough to not be recommended. They're the areas you want to investigate. So it really directs, who may not be a professional interviewer, what are the areas you need to cover off that can't be covered within the questionnaire. It highlights those areas you need to investigate further, but it's still what we're saying, they're recommended. Once you feel happy about those gray areas, then you can put that into how you would go forward and coach that person.
Yeah, exactly. Well, good. I think we've exhausted the assessment category.
Oh no, we haven't. But we'll continue.
No. Pete.
Don't look, you talk about 25 years, I'll talk to you about 25 years. But what I do want to know is your book, Why Your Sales Don't Scale. Why don't companies' sales scale?
Right. This is because we treat companies like, we treat sales like an accounting piece. We have all these numbers that we measure against KPIs, and we feel that this is a way of controlling our sales pipeline and our sales people as well. And forgetting that actually sales is a human business. It's human to human, even B2B, it's human. So that's one reason. We rely on those numbers and we forget about the people in the business. And that's all of the nuances that we need to be aware of. And then secondly, we internally focus on product features and benefits. And this worked up until 2005. But thereafter, since 2006, there's been a meteoric rise in social media and access to information. Our buyers have changed. The way they access information has changed. So you can't continue to sell in the way that you sold previously, because everything else has changed around you. So the reason why sales don't scale is because you haven't adapted enough and you haven't aligned yourself to your buyers. They will not scale unless you're able to stay close to your key customers. They will not scale unless you have an organization that's aligned to your key customers. They will not scale unless you have humanity within your business. I'm not saying you don't have numbers. Numbers are really important, but it shouldn't be led by that when I'm not talking about recruitment now, but when you're growing and scaling a business.
KG?
I mean, there's so much to unpack there. I know that you're not saying shy away from the numbers, though. You're not saying like forget the whole FP&A department, that doesn't exist, but you're suggesting to make a more human-oriented and customer-oriented organization, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. We are so locked into the sales process. How long have we had that sales process?
Mm-hmm.
When you look at books on the sales process, the 7 steps to sales, tell me how many of them have changed?
All of them. Oh, well, the old ones have not. Yeah, the Miller-Hymans and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, same old stuff.
Right. In that time, in the way you speak to your buyers, in the way you communicate with your buyers, in the way your buyers buy, has that changed?
No, totally changed.
So how come the two things are not matching up? How that's what I'm talking about. The sales process and the numbers around the sales process and how you move people along. People don't move along in that way anymore.
No, it's so true. It's funny. Several of my clients, I'm advising many of my clients to be looking for heads of sales that are process-oriented individuals that can help and work with revenue operations to build a sales process that mirrors their customers' buying process. And while there's, a lot of buyers go through similar stages. It's not exactly the same. You can't just this is a learning lesson that I've had through my career. You can't just take an off the shelf sales process that you downloaded off of wherever and just slap it onto your team. You've got to do some customization to match your customer's buying process. I've always said that the best sales process matches your customer's buying process. So why wouldn't it be customized? Why wouldn't it be? So this is perfect, by the way, Janice, excuse me. My sister's name is Janet. Sorry. How do you, so given that, let's now look to the future. How do we future-proof our sales organizations?
And I think it's really interesting. You're coming up against a lot of organizations that are slapping that sales process, even today, slapping that sales process, even new organizations onto their salespeople and say, go run with that. Instead, future-proofing. Well, if you were transitioning from one to the other, I would get your key customers in a room, interview them, and go through what is their buying process, how do they buy, who's involved, all of that. These are your key customers. So the 80-20 rule, 20% of your customers give you 80% of your revenue. So even if you have thousands of customers, it's not a lot of people you need to be focusing on. After all, this is 80% of your revenue. So, I would understand inside out the way that they buy. Then that you're going to retrofit what you do as a sales organization into that. So you're not going to be hitting all of the markers you don't need to. What you need to do is you need to understand what are the moments of truth, what are the areas that are going to make the biggest impact to your customers. They're the ones you need to focus on. So you've got your buyer's journeys, because it's not going to be one, it's several. And there's going to be some that you're going to excel at. And the ones you excel at, those touch points, those crossover points, those decision-making points, the things that are going to move your buyers forward, the ones you're going to sell at are the ones that are going to create the biggest impact for your customers. You're retrofitting what you're doing internally to suit your key customers externally. And you think, well, what about the rest of our customers? Well, actually, if you're hitting the markers of your key customers, you're hitting the majority of the markers of everyone else, right? But you're aligning it to the way your buyers, your key buyers prefer to buy. You're not starting with your process first, you're starting with their process first, because they're the ones that are in control. So that's what I would say to and what I work with organizations that are in transition. And in terms of future-proofing your organization, you've got to continue to stay relevant to your customers. So I would still work with who are my key customers, who are the ones that are bringing in, and I would make sure that I create partnerships with them. So you're going through the building trust, being the trusted advisor, to now having a partnership with them. You want to be so closely aligned so that they trust you and they bring you into the decisions, even when there isn't a sale at the end of it. That's where you want to get to. As your buyers grow, you're growing too. If you're hitting their revenue targets, guess what? You're hitting your revenue targets. Your customers, your buyers understand you're a business and you need to be profitable. But the more profitable you make them, the more profitable you are. In sales, we need to do this 160-degree change of view from an inside out organization to an outside in organization. It's hard. It is hard.
Well,
go on.
Well, no, I was going to say two things. First of all, Pete, just make a note next time. We need to have somebody that's a little bit more passionate on the show. She's not passionate enough. Okay. No.
Duly noted.
Yeah, duly noted. But no, Janet, I saw Janice. God, I did it again.
Don't worry. I know I'm your sister.
My sister's birthday is next Monday. And anyway, never mind. I did see that you just said it, but now I'm gonna have to ask, because you did write about inside out versus outside in organizations there. What is that? What are those types, and which is better? I don't even know.
Well, traditionally, we're inside out organizations. We're focused on the sales process. We're focused on features and benefits. We want to sell. We're hitting targets. Our quarterly targets got nothing to do with the customer's year and what their needs are. So that's an inside out organization. And I recently delivered a keynote on this last week, and it was to the kind of global banking sector. And so I asked them to kind of raise their hands if they're outside in organization, banking sector, right? Who amongst us have not had problems with our banks, right?
Setup. That was a setup.
About 80% of them raised their hands really high and said, we're inside out. We've heard of voice of the customer. We've heard of things like customer experience. We're an outside in organization. So then I kind of went through the keynote and started asking them, various questions that they need to pose to whether they are. And then I surveyed them afterwards, and there are a lot less people that were demanding that they are outside in organizations.
Yeah.
And, the key thing is I think the key thing is our perspective. We think that we're taking on the customer's perspective when we are talking about the benefits to them. And we think that, we're getting really clever about getting customers what we think they need.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But then when I ask them, when was the last time you asked your customer? It's like you get heads kind of turning, really. It's like they don't want to be picked on. They haven't asked the customer. So what we do is just enough as a sales organizer, just enough to get them into our funnel, just enough to get them down a funnel, just enough. We do just enough thinking about the customer. But actually, how do we know it's the customer's perspective unless we start asking them? How do we know that we're a customer-centric organization unless we start setting some targets, some measures in place to measure that? So I'm not talking about the net promoter score.
Yeah, I hate the net promoter score.
I'm not talking about that. We all get it on our phone and we kind of like press 9, but we really hate the organization and we certainly wouldn't recommend them. I'm not talking about these standardized. We're particularly lazy in sales. We've got to go that bit further and work that much harder to really be intentional about the people, the processes, the questions we ask ourselves. If you say this is the customer's perspective, I want you to ask yourself, how do you know? And as soon as you start interrogating what you think is the customer, you realize it isn't. How can you measure that? That's why I want you. How do you know it's the customer's perspective? How can you measure that really measure that they're happy? What will tell you that? How often do you go back into the organization? How often is the customer around the table when you're creating a new feature, a new benefit? How often do you have a feedback from the customer when you're onboarding? When they're a year in, when they're six months in, how often do you go and talk to them and gather that data? How often do you know when they've reached a block so they're running with the product, but there's going to be several little blocks in use of the product from different departments within the customer organization? But you think, well, how can I get that data? That's your problem. You need to get that data. You need to find that out. This is what I mean when you're a partnership to that organization. If when you sell that product and that service, you say that we want to continue to innovate this product at, no cost to you, and we will need to come in and survey, or we'll need to drop a code in. So we're gathering this data. We want to sit around the table and talk to you about what this means. We want to talk to you about where we're failing to meet some of our own internal targets. We need to give them more information that they need so they know that we're working on their behalf. Unless you're doing that, not sell it and leave it, Unless you're doing that, you are not an outside in organization. Unless you've got those markers in 6 months, 1 year, a year and a half from now, that you're gathering that feedback and making those changes and telling and talking to your customers about it, you're not an outside in organization. Very few organizations are doing that. And that's why lots of them did not raise their hands after I went through all of these things.
So Janice, take a sip.
Yeah, exactly.
give you a break. So not a lot of us can say we've been in sales for 25 years. I think everybody in here would say we're pretty close to it. As each year ticks by, don't you see the value of salespeople being lesser and lesser as time goes on? And my case in point is, it's been more, you see the rise of the chief revenue officer versus chief sales officer, okay? Product and marketing being intertwined, so it's such a good product that everybody knows about that you don't need that high level of salesperson in order to sell it, because the demand is already there. Also, 25 years ago, you had salespeople because the information was decentralized. You needed a salesperson to go out to market and distribute the knowledge. Now, everybody has 3 buyers or 3 sellers that they're looking for, and they're looking like, convince me why you're one of the 3 when they call up. Do you see the value of sales going down, the revenue process value going up? I'll hang up and listen for my answer.
The value of sales is going up, not down, but it's the sales has changed. Remember I said about that gap between the two? The salesperson now is a business consultant. And so if you're able to service the customer's needs, help the customer understand what their needs are, help the customer sell in, the customer's more selling your product in their organization than you are. If you understand that, then how you are going to enable that. You can only enable that if you understand the 20 or so people that are around the buying unit, the decision-making unit. Your job is to gather enough information to enable the person to sell it into the organization on your behalf. Your job is to help them to interpret the information that they need. Your job is to understand what are the business goals, the customer's business goals, and what are their goals for their customer. Your job is to help them to understand that and understand the process and the barriers and remove them. You're not working in that organization, but you are really. You are really. So your role has changed. Less is it on closing. And I must say, I could do a whole hour on some of the words that we use in sales.
Can we say synonymous with risk and pay at risk? Because
Absolutely.
So the salesperson isn't taking on as much risk as back in the day. So does that mean that maybe they should get a better salary and a lower overall compensation? Or do you take pay at risk away and just pay them full salary?
Yes. Yes. It's going to be different for different organizations. And
I'm asking your organization.
Well,
why do we need pay at risk?
When I first started in sales, I was commission only. And so I was incentivized by the commission. I don't think that model works now. And I think because
you don't have any control. The company has, if you're getting 100% commission, company has no control over your actions.
Yes. Well, I would expect my company to trust me as I trust the organization I work with. There's got to be some mutual basis for our agreements here, right? And I think that so much has changed in sales that all of these salespeople have been working from home, and it's been very uncomfortable for sales leaders not having this team of people that he can keep his beady eye on and watch. All of that has gone, really. I think that, the culture within sales has got to change. So if we take away measuring people by the revenue, and we're looking at, well, how else can we measure activity? How else can we measure customer feedback? How else can we measure and reward people? If we look at really what the outcome is, what we want are lifelong customers, ideally. How do we get that lifelong customer? What kind of behaviors do we need in order to achieve that? Regardless of what we're talking about, SDRs, BDMs, it doesn't really matter. What are the kind of behaviors that we need to mimic in order to make sure we have a particular type of customer that is happy with our product and service? That is what we need to be measuring, and that is what we need to be rewarding people on.
Will we find any of that in your book, Business Evolution, Creating Growth in a Rapidly Changing World?
I would say, Pete, that is a great link. Really good. I'm impressed by that. Fantastic.
We'll keep that in.
Yes. Business Evolution, Creating Growth in a Rapidly Changing World. It talks about the 4 essential Ps: personality, purpose, pleasure, and process. These are the you can use it in 2 ways: personal benchmarks and organizational benchmarks. Is there a match between how I show up in my working environment from my personality? Is there a match there with the culture that I'm working in? Is there a match in terms of my purpose, what I'm here to do, what my strengths and skills are, what my values are, and the purpose of the organization? Am I aligned with that? And the purpose of the organization is to make their customers happy, and how they go about doing that. And then in terms of pleasure, this is around the customer experience. Does the culture of the organization and the way that they deliver great experiences to the customer, is that aligned to how I want to please my customers? And then processes. This is around how is the processes of the organization maintaining those relationships, keeping the customers happy? Is that aligned with the way that I want to work? So, that the company allows me to work from home and allows me to take holidays when I want them, just as long as I'm meeting the targets of behavior, successes with my customers, activity, KPIs and so forth. So it's really about understanding those 4 areas. And if there's an alignment between me and the organization, is an alignment between the organization and the customers.
Janice B. Gordon, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure. I've loved it.
For our listeners and viewers, what's your preferred way of getting contacted? In case we pick up a couple customers for you. And if we do, just what are beaks?
Yes, no problem. Janice B. Gordon, if you put that in LinkedIn, you'll only find me, and you'll find all of my social media links, whether it's LinkedIn, Twitter, or Instagram. Janice B. Gordon, my speaking website, or scaleyourselves.co.uk, and you can go visit the podcast and everything else to do with Scale Your Sales.
Janice, great job.
Loved it.
On behalf of Jamie, Justin, KG, and myself, Pete, we thank you for listening. If you like what you heard today, please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm just telling you, the algorithms really love it when you hit that little bell and subscribe. It'll take 30 people from learning about SaaS to 3,000. We'd like to say thanks to our Patreon supporter for supporting our content. It's a real ego boost. Please give us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. KG, you know anything about Brent Keltner? He's got a masterclass.
I've heard it's a masterful masterclass.
I'm telling you, if you got a challenge for training and enablement, stuck in the old product-driven model, the even bigger challenge is changing the product-driven mindset. Your solution is Brent Keltner's Revenue Acceleration Playbook Masterclass with sales and marketing expert Brent Keltner. It's a free 60-minute growth consultation at winalytics.com. We'd also like to thank Aaron J. and Trent S. Hey, let's not forget about Iron Man. Unlock key account growth with Demand Farm Smart software to bring account planning and relationship intelligence into your CRM, making key account management practice data-driven, predictable, and scalable. Request a demo now at demandfarm.com. Ask for Ironman. Hey, recruiters, you're looking for a good software manager? We got a good one here. 10 years. I don't know what these acronyms are, but there's a NOJS in there. Check it out. Email Pete at sassholes.net if you're interested. All right, guys, thank you for listening. Cue the non-copyrighted music.